Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Spectrum and Users What You Need to Know About the Path to Fixed LTE webinar, presented by Telrad Networks. My name is Dory Aran of Eye Opening Marketing, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. We would like to hear from you and would like to include your voice in the conversation. So ask questions, share comments, even challenge our ideas. Use the question and answer panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player to share at any time during the webinar. We will have a couple of poll questions during the webinar. Those will pop up right on your screen. We'll give you a few seconds to answer each and share the results. We will also have time for questions at the end. Today's presenter is Tom Gruba, who has over 30 years of experience in telecommunications in various capacities, including engineering, product management, sales, and marketing. Many of Tom's accomplishments surfaced as he served as Director of Marketing in Alcatel-Lucent's Wireless Infrastructure Division, as Head of Product Marketing at Motorola, and as CMO of their successful Canopy Broadband Wireless startup. Also joining us today is Nick Dewar, Vice President of Systems Engineering and Business Development for Telrad Networks. He is a wealth of LTE knowledge and will help to answer any product or technical questions that arise. We're proud to have them with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Tom Gruba.
Thank you very much, Dory. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. And today what we're going to talk about are three essential components of where we are. And it's number one, what's changing in the marketplace? Number two, why is having managed or licensed spectrum essential to success? And number three is fixed LTE affordable and low density markets. Hopefully, within this context, we'll be able to go through these topics and meet your needs for what you're attempting to accomplish on your own. Forces of change. So the things that are going on in spectrum with users and applications themselves. And if you look at what's going on, you've got some game changers happening out there. User habits and expectations are changing. Most of you know that, but we'll talk about some of the details on what's driving that. Number two, 20 years ago, mobile operators, they said they would never do anything unlicensed, and now you see that they're doing that with LTE-U and LTE-LAA. CBRS, which has also been nicknamed the Innovation Band, is a new way of leveraging more operators being able to use a fixed chunk of spectrum. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then finally, we'll talk about LTE products in the fixed wireless market and what makes them appropriate and what makes them great products to serve users in the rural and the suburban and the urban type of markets. We're going to stop here and do our first poll. The poll helps us understand what you're thinking about, and Dory's going to go ahead and open up that poll, so I'll turn it over to Dory.
Yep, you should be seeing it on your screens now.
And Dory, I've progressed a bit. I can see that the first question is, are you determining the business case, investigating LTE technology, evaluating vendors, or just looking to try it?
I'm going to give that a couple more seconds.
Yeah, look at that. 81% have voted. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate that.
Okay, so let's look at the results. Where are you in the process of evaluating fixed LTE for your network? We have 19% determining the business case, 31% investigating LTE technology, 10% evaluating LTE vendors, 6% looking to try it, and 34% have other reasons.
Very good, thank you. So let's talk about what's going on with users, what's happening with users. If you've been in the business a while, and a lot of times those fixed broadband networks were set up, people were doing shopping, they were doing email, they're running businesses. But today you look at it and the number of people that are streaming video is enormous. In fact, if you see the stat there, in 2010, 4.5% of households cut the cord, which is cutting cable, out of their lives, and they thought they'd go after streaming. Of course, as more and more people, more and more devices come on the scene, as more and more content becomes available to stream, in 2016, 22% or 26.7 million households have cut the cord. So there's great opportunity for service providers, broadband service providers, and the problem is it's going to create a challenge. And if you look at the text just down below, a 4K video, Amazon and Netflix have publicly commented that said you need minimum of 15 megabits up to 25 megabits per stream to do 4K video. Okay, 21% of census blocks out there don't have access to 25 megabits per second. So if you look at the opportunity available today, what we thought 20 years ago is we'll serve the market and everyone will be set. And what's happening is people keep consuming bandwidth, so it continues to expand the opportunity. On the right-hand side of the slide, what you find though is, you know what, those people that came out of cable treat streaming just like it was cable. So there's a great story, not great for the service provider, but a great story where they couldn't figure out how one home was consuming so many gigabytes of data per month. So they visited the house, and when they walked in, they found out that every TV on the first floor was on, and they were all doing streaming video. So it tells you that the mindset from cable to streaming doesn't change. But let's talk about what people are doing and what's continuing to drive the volume. This slide was actually from Fierce Wireless and P3 Strategy Analytics. It's, if you look across the top, mobile operators. But what I want you to focus on is if you look at the bottom of the chart, you see the bars that are marked Wi-Fi. So that's what people are doing in their homes or at their friend's house, because that's typically where they're going to be on Wi-Fi. And you can see that there's a large dominance of YouTube and Facebook, Netflix, and then browsing. If you look at the changes that have occurred recently, in the fourth quarter of 2016, Sprint and T-Mobile's top application flipped and became YouTube. So it's consistent across the board. That's going to have an impact on what's going on in the marketplace. And to talk about this, I just set this up. It's not literal numbers, but it's generalizations. If you look at users today and you talk about buying a service, I myself get to have a 15 megabit per second package. I've been in telecom for 30 years. I don't even know exactly what that means, right? As a peak rate, when do I care that I'm getting 15? When do I not? I stream a video, it's not a problem. So what's the real net impact? Well, as a service provider, the impact is as you go from one stream to 3 streams, as is happening in a lot of different homes, the package that you're selling might be a 15 meg package or a 25 megabit package, but the average usage per home because of streaming increases with every stream. At this point, I picked 2.5 megabits as an average stream. And so if you had 3 streams, it'd be 7.5 megabits per second. And the problem is in the next column that your sector capacity reduces with those additional streams, and the subscription price doesn't change. So if you look at some of the challenges that are ahead for service providers, it is the ability to sell what the consumer is using. Example, sell them the number of streams that they want to support, because the challenge is that if you sell a 15 meg package or a 25 megabit package, they don't necessarily relate that to streams. And so you can compare it to something like water, where if you turn on one faucet in a house, it comes out very rapidly. But if you turn on all the faucets in the house, you know that the stream slows down in every case. So if you look at the bullets before, the trend is what we just talked about, the consumption per household on the rise. The concern is, are users willing to pay more? They may not, but if you at least put it in the context of something that they can understand, they might be able to actually make that decision and self-select. The third part is, it's not just about the consumption, it's how do you stay ahead of demand, and that's by adding capacity. And so Nick Dewar and I talk about this because the Telrad radio is a software-defined radio, and being able to increase the capacity of that radio is an important part of our value proposition. So if you look at the will the users pay more problem, I covered this pretty well on the last slide, but if you look at what they're doing, it doesn't have to be video. It can also be music. I myself stream music. I love to do that. But that, of course, is a consumption factor. So in the end, you can look at how to educate users, which might be some of the marketing programs or campaigns you do as a service provider to help educate the user. So at least if they're not using it, maybe they'll shut it down. In a lot of communities, because it is you know everybody on your service, you help them understand that they're doing everybody a benefit if they can, when you need it, use it, and when you're not, shut it off. The other problem is, how do we keep up with that capacity and demand? And for that, we talk about a few different mechanisms. Number one, it's that software-defined radio, and you want to have a vendor that is going to have a capacity roadmap. Now, Telrad follows the LTE roadmap that is developed by the 3GPP, and the 3GPP is the big standards body for the mobile operators as well as fixed, but predominantly mobile, where they're consuming lots of capacity and have that thirst such that the roadmap is driven to increase capacity features along the way, all the way up to 5G. Second is a flexible radio. The Telrad radio can be deployed, and I'll show you an example of that later, in many different forms and fashions. So you're putting one radio on the truck, but you may deploy it as a 2x2 radio, 2 transmit, 2 receive, all the way up to a 4x4 radio. And so you've got the flexibility to start small and grow. So we call it a pay-as-you-grow model. Second is that if you look at spectrum such as 3.5 gigahertz, you want to have a radio that will meet today's needs. So if you start at 3.65 gigahertz and you bought a radio that works in that band, you want to prepare yourself for the future. So if you do get the 3.5 band, CBRS band, as it becomes available, you've got a radio that does two things. One, it's tunable across the entire band, and the Telrad radio tunes across 290 megahertz. And I tell my sons, who I'm trying to describe radio technology to them, it's like getting in your car and tuning anywhere in the FM band. You wouldn't buy a radio that only tunes part of your band. So tunable radio across the band is very important. The second is the wideband radio head. It can serve 40 megahertz of spectrum at once, and that, of course, is very important to capacity. Selecting the right spectrum is a key component of avoiding or reducing the opportunity for interference to reduce the capacity in your network. And then the third is understanding the mechanisms that are available, like carrier aggregation, for making use of spectrum as it becomes available. You may not always get spectrum that's contiguous. It may come in blocks. And so being able to understand your growth plans and being able to deal with different sizes of spectrum and different where they lie in the band. If we talk about what Telrad is doing for a capacity perspective, carrier aggregation, so being able to concatenate two channels into one, is the ability to make them look like one chunk of spectrum, which will help you with your peak speeds. It requires a software update in our radio, so that's a good thing. The radio stays right on the tower. You do a software download to it. As we go forward in time, multi-user MIMO comes out later this year, increases your spectral efficiency, and you go from a 5 bits per hertz up to 10 bits per hertz. So you're using the 4 antennas and you're transmitting 2 pairs of antennas. So you're essentially able to serve more subscribers than before you had multi-user MIMO. It's the same throughput speed, but it allows you to double the number of users. If that doubling is theoretically everything's perfect, you would double the number of users. Dual sector is another great feature, because with one radio, you could actually serve 2 different sectors simultaneously. It does require 2 RF channels, but the nice thing is, again, you have one radio on the truck that can be used in a get started situation, starting with 2 sectors, and as capacity needs grow, you can reuse that radio in a 4x4 configuration, add another radio onto the tower, and continue in a pay-as-you-grow model. Nick, is there anything that you want to add to any of these features, or talk about any additional ones?
I think you nailed it, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, what's happening with spectrum? So if we talk about the challenges, is that more and more people are requiring spectrum. More and more companies are requiring spectrum. Back 20 years ago, 2.4 was the spectrum of choice when we were deploying canopy and technologies like that. No one talks about 2.4 anymore because the noise floor has risen too high. So now with LTEU and LTE LAA, the concern is going to be that 5 gigahertz will have a noise floor rise. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go forward. That demand is being changed by a lot of things. Just to point out a couple, you've got mobile operators that are just so capacity crunched, especially when they've offered the unlimited data plans. Electric utilities are now wanting to deploy IP out to the substation so that they can get big data employed and control at those particular substations. Internet of Things, of course, is another area that is growing with smart homes and other industrial Internet of Things, where people are looking at leveraging technology to do more. So you just take it from here that it says more and more people are in competition for a very valuable resource, and that is spectrum. So if you're looking at your business today and you're trying to determine, am I going to LTE or not? One of those things that you want to look at is, what are the types of customers I serve? And if those are business customers where you want a service level agreement, you'll reduce your risk greatly if you get licensed spectrum or managed spectrum, say the 3.5 CBRS band. And so the first thing that you should do is investigate spectrum costs and planning and think about that so you're not shut out. If we look at the unlicensed spectrum, these other technologies, LTEU, LAA, multi-fire, as those creep into more and more populated areas, and just for an example, everyone thinks of urban like Chicago, but I grew up in a town that was 35,000. That's a significant market for any operator. And so these technologies, LTEU, LAA, will show up there. And if you've been providing a service in those markets, you can look at the noise floor rise to increase. The problem that presents is that if you look at buying a radio that has more capacity, the ability to serve more capacity, for an example, 256 QAM, what Nick can tell you in vast detail is that 256 QAM, your signal to noise ratio has to be very high. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It gets shifts down to 64 QAM or 16 QAM. And so you're buying a very expensive radio that can't perform because the noise floor rises on you. So, you know, it's one of those investment choices. And so we like to bring that up to say, depending on where you are, understand what might be happening in the next few years. I covered the first part, which is really about the modulation schemes. I liken it to those of you that are on the business side. It's like driving up a mountain. You might be, you know, in fifth gear cruising down the highway just fine. But as you start to go up the mountain, you're going to have to downshift, right? You go to fourth gear and then third gear, et cetera, et cetera. And that's no different than an RF performance of a radio. In the event of interference, it's going to slow down. So the second part of this slide is really talking about the licensed spectrum or managed spectrum is becoming a business imperative. So number one, determine if your service area is at risk. And then number two, if you think it is or could be, then investigate looking at 2.5 gigahertz, which is still available in places, and then 3.65, which is expanding out to include the CBRS band, which is 3.5 gigahertz. So you can get started with 3.65. People have licenses that you can acquire. Those were very inexpensive. It was an application fee when they first got them. And so if you found someone that had them, you could start deploying and then build out to CBRS. So just some strategies there. If we talk about specifics here, like I said, 2.5 is still available in places. There were two holders of it. One is the educational institutions that were set up in the 60s or 70s, and then Sprint. So depending on where you are, you can investigate that. If you need help with that investigation, let us know. We know a lot of fine people that can help determine what's going on at 2.5. At 3 gigahertz, we talk about the 3.65 band, but then also the 100 megahertz that's available for CBRS, and GAA is going to be available later this year, and with the PAL licenses suspected of being auctioned in 2019. Again, looking at your radio, that's why I highlighted and bolded the area here. The Telrad radio supports that entire 3 gigahertz band, the 355 all the way up to 300 megahertz beyond that. The new spectrum, and what I mean beyond that is there are discussions about 3.7 to 3.8 for additional spectrum. So given our radio does the 290 megahertz plus 40 in operation, you're looking at being able to survive or serve your needs in that band. If you look at how much the spectrum cost, this is but one example. Spectrum bids and pricing occur at all different rates. And we're hoping to bring some expertise onto a future webinar of people that can talk about spectrum valuations. But in this example, and I circled the area at 2.5 gigahertz, if you were using it for mobile, the price or what people have paid is up to $1. I shouldn't say up to $1. I know that in this example, it was $1 for per megahertz pop. But if it was a fixed application, they paid 35 cents a megahertz pop. So your fixed versus mobile impacts the price of that spectrum. And then if you look at the 365, as you get into the PAL licensing, the estimate was 30 cents. And if you ask yourself, well, why is there a difference between fixed at 2.5 and 3.5? That's because 2.5 is a little bit lower frequency. It's going to perform a little bit better from a penetration standpoint. So there's a premium on 2.5 of, at this case, a nickel. But again, we hope to bring some expertise and have someone talk about this in more detail and more of the options, because it's an important part of understanding your business case and getting to market. So here's an example of what we talk about from a tunable radio. And so here's a picture of it where we've drawn it from 355 gigahertz all the way up to 3.7, and carrier aggregation being a key feature. You could have two 10 megahertz carriers, blocks of spectrum at the ends of the band, and our radio will actually concatenate them together and allow them to use them more effectively. If you look at the second bullet, the 40 megahertz radio, today we can do 10 by 10. We can aggregate those channels, which is the 3.5 band, but the radio is capable of 20 by 20. And what that means is we'd have to write the software. So customers that are looking at having two chunks of 20 megahertz, we can write the software, but that's what I mean by capable. I'm going to skip the section takeaways. And I think at this point, Dory, we've got another, I'm losing my name.
Another poll. Yes, we do.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me get that launched right now. So this one is asking, what is holding you back from making the move to fixed LTE right now? You're not sure if there's a business case. Acquiring spectrum will kill your business case. You don't know which vendor to choose, or you're not sure what value fixed LTE brings to your business.
We've got 35% of you that have voted so far, up to 45%.
Yep, I'll give that another few seconds.
Yep, thank you. And Dory, I don't know if you noticed it, but the people that attended today, we've got 100 people, which is terrific. And I keep getting alerts that said these other people that are trying to get into the webinar can't get in because we're at capacity. So that's great news.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, good news for all of you that are on today.
Okay, so I'm going to close this out and share the results. So what is holding you back from making the move to fixed LTE? Not sure there's a business case, 22%. 16% of you said acquiring spectrum will kill your business case. 18% said not sure, don't know which vendor to choose. And 44% said not sure what value fixed LTE brings to the business. Very good.
So just to hit a couple of those, we're about to go into this section of why fixed LTE. So that will handle 44% of you. Don't know which vendor to choose. Great. I think this section and Nick can help with that. The 16% acquiring spectrum will kill my business case. This is a very important topic. And in the future, if you've got that question, come talk to us. And then we've got expertise that we work with that can help look at the business case and prove that in most instances, spectrum will not kill your business case. In fact, we've got a lot of customers online. I've got examples of them in a future slide here, but definitely they're all in business. And not sure there's a business case. We're also working hard to clarify that so that people can understand what are the key attributes necessary to be able to afford the investment. So great responses. Thank you all very much. If we move on to why fixed for LTE, it's good to do a baseline of metrics that are happening across the broadband wireless access providers today. And so this was a study commissioned by WISPA, and they released it last year. And I like to share the information because what it does is it helps people understand that may not be operating in an area today, what to expect. And if I look at the ARPU range, if you look at the graph that's in the report, and the report is available for free at the wispa.org website. So I encourage you to grab that report. It's very well done. But 70% of the ARPU is over $40. And as you look at the stats, it goes all the way up to $70. So it's very healthy. And down below is a breakout that the $51 to $60 range, 23% of the people that responded are getting $51 to $60, and 27% are getting over $60. So those are very impressive numbers. So for those of you that said you're not sure there's a business case, if you're looking at ARPU ranges where these were across the nation, I think there were 116 people that responded to it. These are very good numbers to use in a business case. Churn, another big concern is churn. And there was a great churn number that 67% were in the range of between 0 and 1%. So again, churn is a very important component of your business case. Minimizing churn is the key. And when I asked people, that's the secret to reducing churn, they said, just keep the service good. That's it. People will stick with you. Subscriber acquisition cost, I don't have a lot of detail on it. I think there's some very creative ways to get subscribers onto your network without spending $200 to $400, but that was the number reported. And when you look at growth, 57% of respondents reported a greater than 11% growth. So very healthy numbers for a business. Two other factors is CAF2 is an opportunity to get government funding if you're in an area where there's unserved people. They don't use the term underserved anymore. I was interested to find if you can't get access to 25 megabit service, they simply consider you unserved. So by definition. All right, and then of course there were people both using licensed and unlicensed spectrum.
Hey Tom, I had a question that I missed before when you were talking about MIMO and so on. There's someone asking, what are the real dates for MU MIMO and carrier aggregation availability?
So thankfully I have Nick on with me today.
Sure, I can comment. So first of all, carrier aggregation is something that we can perform in a demo even in February of 2018. General availability is end of Q2 for CA, that's carrier aggregation. Prior to that, there's our 6.9 release, which is dual carrier. The only difference there is really that the carriers would have to be independent and couldn't necessarily be combined in order to produce the aggregate bandwidth of the two channels combined. MU MIMO, on the other hand, is targeted somewhere around the end of Q3 for beta, and we expect general availability to take place in Q4 of this year. And that's something I've personally seen some of the test results and so forth, so I can definitely state that it is progressing very well.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's a great question. So for those of you that were asking, not sure what value fixed LTE brings, or not sure there's a business case, hopefully this slide will help. Number one, LTE is a non-line of sight technology. And if you translate it into marketing terms, it's more share per tower. And when you do more share per tower, it actually reduces your cost per sub. So very, very helpful at being able to deploy and reaching customers that normally could not or previously not been reached. Number two, it's because you're using a managed spectrum or a licensed spectrum, you have the ability to offer a service level agreement. And to some people said, well, they actually are offering a service level agreement with unlicensed. Maybe our way of saying it is you can offer a service level agreement and sleep at night. So serving those business customers, which are your most valuable customers, from the standpoint of they usually want more of something and they want extra and they want additional service and support, so they become revenue-wise a more valuable customer financially. And so being able to do that and have the features that Telrad has to serve those customers. So if they want to eliminate a lease line, for example, we've got all the tools and the software to do that. If you're looking at an exit strategy, which I think most businesses keep that in some perspective, if you sell a network today with proprietary hardware, private equity people out there will tell you they value at zero. They assume they've got to rip and replace. If it's LTE, it's a standards-based product, and so your exit value will be higher because they will give you value for the equipment. If you're looking to get loans, previously customers of ours would say, you know, if you walked in and told a banker that you were going to do this fixed wireless thing, they didn't have any real context, but when you walk in and say, I'm doing LTE just like on your phone, they actually said it's a much easier conversation to have. And finally, from a business perspective, LTE technology scales extremely well. And so we can get into more detail. Nick can tell you song and verse, but just know that it's a very scalable architecture. From a business protection, like I said before, the capacity roadmap is being driven by mobile operators, not the top, but actually all mobile operators. And they're doing that through 3GPP, which is also a component of the GSMA, the largest association in the world. Lots of manufacturers. So if you look at LTE, there's interoperability that can occur between products. And so you've got a lot of manufacturers. You're not tied to one particular vendor and hoping that they got their roadmap right. LTE, as most of you would realize, is a carrier grade product, which impacts reliability and performance. And Nick can give you the extra energy and effort that Telrad put into designing its own radio, the PHY and the MAC layer, so that we get the best performance in a fixed environment. So we can give you a lot of detail there. CPE options and manufacturers. Not only does Telrad do the CPE that's necessary, our latest with Cat6, which has carrier aggregation, but also if you had a choice in some other manufacturers, knowing that it's LTE and standards-based, that can be accomplished. And then something that most people don't think about, but is very important, especially if you're going after scaling your network very large, is the available talent pool that understand LTE, because LTE is a worldwide standard. There's a lot more people that are familiar with the technology, and it's a lot easier to find that talent. So that'll save you time. If we talk about CBRS, so it's the additional 100 megahertz of spectrum. So we covered that to some degree. CBRS leverages 10 megahertz channels, which is why the carrier aggregation doing 10 by 10 is important to you today. Capacity rule of thumb, if you're looking at LTE, LTE is LTE because it's a standard. And so capacity rule of thumb is 5.5 bits per hertz. And Telrad, because we are purpose-built product, we're not using off-the-shelf chipsets, delivers on that 5.5 bits per hertz. If you look at the final bullet here, the ecosystem can aggregate carriers, right? The LTE ecosystem, so that you're looking at the 10 by 10 for full 20 megahertz of performance, but we can support, again, 20 by 20 in the event that you can acquire spectrum in that amount of size, those sizes. For operators, what I did with this particular slide was look at what is your goal? If I'm an operator and I want to increase market share per tower, what do I have? Well, LTE gives you non-line of sight capability and gives you the capacity roadmap to continually increase your system capacity off of that sector. If I want to extend the life of deployed assets, one of the comments I've heard was, well, you know, the other technology we're using is cheaper. It also gets replaced every 3 years. So our time on the tower provides a better ROI in terms of your business case. So the equipment might cost more upfront, but the non-line of sight capability, as well as the software upgrade for capacity, and what Telrad does, which is the pay-as-you-grow model, really make it a very compelling value proposition to help operators get to market, test new markets, and be able to continually grow the capacity in those sectors. If you look at the higher value services, on the far right-hand side under the tools, the capabilities and features necessary to serve business customers. And Nick, you know, you do a great job of describing some of those additional capabilities to serve those business customers that Telrad is leading the pack in terms of providing those. Do you mind spending a minute on that?
Yeah, well, in terms of business services, we have a tunnel mode, which we call VPLS, Virtual Private Line or LAN Service. It's essentially layer 2 tunneling through the LTE ecosystem. So we can provide the subscriber unit as a bridge to customer prem equipment, say for instance, customers PICs, router, firewall, etc. Place public IP addressing on their equipment and impose quality of service through the standard LTE ecosystem. And that's really the differentiator. There are others claiming to support layer 2, but not necessarily having the embedded ability to introduce and enforce LTE-based QoS. So that's really a key differentiator as it applies to Telrad layer 2.
Great, thank you. And if you look at the last goal, increasing business value, lowering those startup costs. We know that if you're successful, we'll be successful. So helping get into those low density, low ARPU markets and still having a business case is very important to us. We've got the flexibility in the radio to do it, and then you're reusing that existing radio to grow your capacity. The deployment flexibility is what we call that, and I've got a slide here that talks about 6 different options for deploying your network. And then of course that non-line of sight piece, which is so important to increasing the number of users on that particular sector or on that tower. So why Telrad for LTE? The higher market share per tower. You're reaching previously unreachable customers because of non-line of sight, and that really works in your favor from a cost per sub perspective. And then with the deployment flexibility we just talked about, we're good in low density, low ARPU markets. Leveraging capital efficiently. So if you look at the different deployment models that we're talking about, it enables you as an operator to go test new markets and do that cost effectively. So number one, you're able to use less capital to go try service in a new area and then grow and expand that service. And then number two, if you look at ripping and replacing less often, that means that at year 3, when you might be replacing a proprietary product with another proprietary product, what this means is you can use that capital to go into new areas and test new markets as opposed to replacing what you already have. And then the business services that Nick covered there, along with it being a carrier grade, which provides you service level agreement capability, are 3 key areas. Here is the deployment flexibility model that I'm talking about. So in the upper left-hand corner, if I'm in a low density, low ARPU environment, you can purchase the radio, and as a 2x2 single sector, you see the spectrum capacity that you would have. So you buy the radio at lower cost to get it started, and then you license it up as you go forward in time. So you're still having one radio on the truck, deploying one radio, and when you want to get it to a higher capacity through software keying and features, we're able to do that. I'm going to skip over item number 2. It's something that we can do, but it's not as recommended. It's more of a unique case. But number 3 is a great case where we're talking about flexible use of spectrum, where you can do dual sectors. So one radio can serve 2 different areas. You see that it's serving a house and a windmill. So perhaps we're in Holland. And then of course a farm on the right-hand side. If I look at numbers 4 through 6, you're now looking at the maximum capability of the radio. So if I need the best non-line of sight penetration, the radio's in 4x4 transmit 4 mode. If I look at the next one, I need the maximum peak rate. I can do that by using carrier aggregation. And if I'm in the last one, the maximum spectral efficiency. This is where, okay, I can't get access to additional spectrum, but I still need to serve more users. This is where multi-user MIMO comes in. So the deployment flexibility is a strength of Telrad's, and we'd be happy to talk about, for any of you that are looking to deploy, what does that look like from a financial perspective?
And Tom, it's Nick. If I can just comment that in scenario 3, that example shows two 10 megahertz channels. That's 10 per carrier, so 50 meg each, 100 meg aggregate. That feature is actually capable of two 20 megahertz channels, so that would be 2 times 100 megabit per sector in the dual sector dual carrier mode.
Thank you, Nick. I'll make an update too.
So Tom, we also have a couple of questions. Can you combine carrier aggregation and MU-MIMO?
Great question, and no, you cannot.
And another question, I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly, I'll try it. Once it is fixed, can I have to consider synchronization for the solution? If yes, what do you recommend?
The solution itself is GPS synchronized, so the base stations would work off 1 PPS or 1 pulse per second via an external GPS head. The GPS heads can be daisy chained between the base stations within a tower location, or each base station itself can have its own independent external GPS. So that in itself is our synchronization, and beyond that, we would configure the network with a common TDD ratio.
Any more questions, Dory?
That's it for now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are great questions. Thanks very much. This is what Nick covered previously in terms of the standard, in terms of the business features. But I just want to point out that the LTE standard does not address layer 2. And so all the work that Nick talked about is unique to Telrad. And we knew it was a business imperative for our customers. And so the engineering work that we did to design it, make sure that it's available and that you can serve those business customers. So for those of you looking at, is there a business case for it? If you've got business customers, know that we've got the right features and functionality to address those needs. This gives you just a couple more examples. If I look at operators,
there is one more question. Yep. Can I push to mobile like a cradle point router in a small area less than 500 acres?
So read that one more time.
Can I push to mobile like a cradle point router in a small area less than 500 acres?
Yeah, it sounds like, I guess, an IoT or a local private network application. Private networks are absolutely the use case, or one of the primary use cases with the technology and with CBRS band in general. So, and subject to propagation study and so forth, yeah, you can provide coverage within a local area of 500 acres.
Thank you, Nick. If you look at some of the operators, Red Zone speaks at many of our road shows. So for those of you that are looking to get a one-day overview from experts in the industry, we set those up for people at different topics, plus of course some about our product. But Red Zone is someone that comes and presents and talks about their network, which is a combination of licensed and unlicensed. And they're in a very treed environment, of course, being in Maine. So they talk about that, and he also talks about winning share from cable companies. So at any point in time, 10% of the cable company base is looking to leave the cable company. And you saw the numbers I posted earlier about the number of people that have left cable. Anyway, this is different customers across the United States. We have more, but this looked the best on the slide. And many of these customers will try some of our latest features. And before we turn those from an FOA to GA. If I look at the entire solution, we talked about the CPE on the left to some degree. The 7000, if you're looking at if you're going from WiMAX to LTE, the 7000 be a great product for you. The 8000 and the 9000. The 9000 has carrier aggregation capability, so it's a Cat6 device. And then below is the 2.5 gigahertz MiFi. So if you want to do just like Verizon Puck, same capability here. If you look toward the right-hand side, A big problem that many of you have probably heard is along the evolved packet core, also called the EPC. Those were designed for mobile networks, and they typically cost millions of dollars. Telrad developed the EPC and created a couple different solutions. One is the box you see halfway down under centralized EPC. It's actually very small. The other very creative and innovative solution is to put an EPC right in the radio itself so that it's localized. And there's some good reasons for doing that. The other thing with the EPC is that it is your gateway out to the internet, and it also provides your functionality for AAA and HSS capabilities. So it's a device you have to have, but what we've done in the last year is actually create scalable pricing so that it doesn't become a deterrent to deploying LTE. So for those of you that had been looking at the EPC as one of those things stopping you from entering the LTE business, look at our solution, because I think you'll find it very amenable to what you're trying to accomplish in your business case. Two other important aspects here I'm going to ask Nick to comment in that are very critical is the network management and performance. People that think only about the radios and the functionality of the network lose sight of where a lot of your operational costs can come in. And the more of those operational costs, the scale problem of having technical people on board doesn't work for your business case. That's where a business case gets hurt, but it's an afterthought many times, so you're already in it before you realize the problem. To help make it such that you have fewer people managing more subscribers, one of the things that Telrad did is we have our own management software product here, which gives you visibility, number one, all the way down to each device so that your technician can understand exactly what's happening when they get that call. But number two, equally as important, is when you want to do a mass software download to update feature sets, you can do that through this mechanism. So two aspects that people forget about in their business case, don't factor it enough, is being able to do your network management, understanding your performance, and also being able to see all the way down to that UA so that you're providing an understanding when a customer calls in their support problems or their question. Nick, anything you can add there?
Well, basically, you hit the key points, but in general, our network management platform will drill down into uplink and downlink subscriber level statistics, which are things that just aren't available from the overhead subscriber management TR69 protocol by itself. Our NMS is able to combine that with statistics taken from the base station, combining logical identities throughout the ecosystem so that you as the end user, the operator, are presented one line per user with very comprehensive information in terms of the performance of that subscriber. That data, as well as all of the provisioning and all KPIs, are available within an API within the NMS. So your external platforms, OSS, and so forth, even billing platforms can very easily integrate and remove the need to learn another system and so forth, whereas it can all be completed via that API. So in many instances, your CSR staff could sit and work off the same common billing platform they always have, but in turn that system or that billing platform is provisioning all of the LTE technology very seamlessly.
Very good. Thank you very much. That is great additions. I only have a few more slides left, actually just a couple, so thanks for hanging in there and start thinking about your questions, since we've got a great resource like Nick on the phone. But why Telrad today? More fixed license experience than others. I think the capabilities we talked about with the layer 2, as well as the things that Nick just covered, very important to a business case. Telrad provides better ROI in more situations. That's because of those different deployment models, pay as you grow, and our understanding that for us to be successful, you've got to be successful. So we're looking at ways to make that easier to do. And then, of course, the entire portfolio and where we're going with it, so that once you do get the product on the tower, it stays on the tower. And we know that that's going to be critical to a win as well. You want to spend more time acquiring customers and serving their needs and not replacing equipment on the tower. Where and when to find us next? We will do additional webinars. Dory and I are working on that plan as we speak. We'll be bringing on guest speakers. We hope to bring on guest speakers for spectrum, spectrum valuation, how to acquire it, CAF, and if you've got an idea on a topic, certainly let us know. I'd be thrilled to work on that. And then events, for anyone that's going to be in Austin at the end of February, Nick and I will be there, as well as others from the Telrad team. If anyone's going to Mobile World Congress, Chris Daniels and the executive team out of Israel will be there. WISP America in Birmingham, and then shows like that. So you can see the list. You can go to our website and see it. Again, Dory and I are looking at additional adds to the list, but if you've got a show that you think we should be at, please let us know. We'd be delighted to hear from you. With that, I'll turn it over to questions and to Dory.
Great. So we've got a few already. Do you support GAA and CBRS? If yes, how do you manage the interface expected in this band?
Okay, the interface. I just need to. The interface to the SAS is via our BreezeView network management platform. BreezeView acts as what's called a domain proxy, and then the eNodeBs, so that's the base stations, and also the CPEs are both considered what's called a CBSD. They will register with the BreezeView NMS and perform a spectrum request and then obtain a grant. So the BreezeView network management platform is the middleware. It's the proxy, the domain proxy that will communicate with the spectrum access system.
And by the way, we might just want to add that we've already tested everything with federated wireless and are ready to go commercial as soon as the licenses are available.
Yes, we're very engaged in the certification process. I personally sit within the CBRS Alliance on various task groups as part of the certification process, definition in terms and process. And I can vouch for the fact that things are moving along very positively.
And Nick, I think the other thing is we've tested the SAS system and did a press release on it with federated wireless last year.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we have several trials in place. Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so with higher frequencies, 2 to 5 gigahertz, how is 9 line of sight possible, more specifically toward fixed applications?
So 2 to 5. So we're still sub 6, and sub 6 gigahertz is deemed very usable, very relevant spectrum in all applications. How does that compare to, say, a proprietary system? The forward error correction and so forth in LTE, things such as HARQ and retransmission requests. All of that scheduling, the fact that it's OFDMA based so that users are consistently being scheduled with time slots and very efficient use of the OFDMA carrier is ultimately creating that ability to better serve and more reliably serve users that may not have perfect line of sight. So the system can effectively adapt to a percentage of errors, whereas in Wi-Fi, it's not usually scheduled, it's usually OFDM based. One interval or one time slot, one TTI would effectively mean one user is consuming all spectral assets, and it just does not scale the same, and the same HRQ and retransmission request capabilities are just not there. So LTE really is designed to be robust in varying link conditions, hence why it's also applicable in mobile. Even though mobile is generally lower spectrum, users are driving at high speed, they're performing handovers, there are rapidly changing link conditions, and this is where we inherit those capabilities, and it's so beneficial to fixed.
Next question, what BC do you support? I'm not sure I know what BC. Do you get that, Nick? Do we need to clarify?
Instead of Bravo Charlie, BC?
Yes.
I'm not sure I followed the question.
Jamie, do you mind maybe clarifying and asking the question again? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. GAA is supposed to be noisy. How do you manage the noise?
Well, we have some advanced techniques in our scheduler, frequency selective scheduling and so forth. GAA, there's also coexistence requirements. So like each base station and each CPE are actually providing feedback to the spectral access system so that it can best optimize all users for the purpose of coexistence. In an urban environment, do you expect it to be noisy? Perhaps it's certainly possible. There's incumbent protection, which is in place to protect the grandfathered 365 users, also the FSS and the coastal equipment, which has some very strict noise requirements. Within GAA, there's some means of coordination within your own network, but the spectral access system will then coordinate cell edge and so forth in areas of overlap between operators.
Okay, we also have clarifications. What band channels do you support? That's what Jamie meant.
Okay, sorry. So band channels, we support band 40, that's the WCS band, 41, that's the EBS or the 2.5 band, 42 and 43, which are the kind of the band, that's the 34 to 36 and 36 to 38, but they've created band 48 as part of CBRS. So band 48 is specific to the CBRS band. So you'll find that everything CBRS related is starting to refer to band 48 versus band 42 or band 43.
Okay, next question. For non-line of sight, what is the distance from the base station should we expect non-line of sight to work effectively?
You know, it really does vary. It depends on the attachment height of the antenna. If you can get that antenna double the height of the tree line and the foliage, you can expect some good results. Terrain certainly has an impact. I can say that we have some near and non-line of sight implementations in mountainous regions like Colorado, where we're up 20, 30 kilometers. In many cases, that's because the equipment's at the mountaintop, and they're able to get a very a very good near line of sight path where there are significant amounts of trees, but there is just a less scattering, perhaps, as you'd find in a dense, heavy moisture environment like Georgia. So assume inside of 5 kilometers, and then everything is subject to an actual propagation study, and then of course real world measurements. And we can help with that. We have those tools. We have North American clutter data and so forth. So we can really give you some good guidelines on your specific situation.
Thank you. Next question. When do you expect the first deployments in CBRS band?
Commercial FCC providing FCC IDs for devices, we expect to happen around the end of June, early July. And immediately from that time on, it's available for commercial use.
Okay, I think I've gotten to all the questions.
Great. And Michael, I will give you a call. I saw your question here, so I'm glad to give you a call after this is over. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time and attention today. If you would like to email us comments or suggestion, tom.gruba, G-R-U-B-A, @telrad.com. I'm always looking for new topics, questions that don't get answered, future guest speakers, anything that you want to do, or tell us where you're going to be or what challenge that you're faced with. And we'll develop the materials, the content, and the conversation from there. So thank you very much, Dory. Thanks for hosting today.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.